the Micpt Reading Circle, and today we are talking about Chapter 1. I'm reading from Chapter 1, Grant Makers and Grant Seekers. So this is our journey here. It's written by Nancy Burke Smith and E. Gabriel Works. All right, so this section is dealing about grant makers and grant seekers. So, what is a grant? In general, a grant is funding provided by a charitable giving foundation, public charity, or government agency to a nonprofit organization that enables the nonprofit organization to perform specified activities for the common good. Grants may also be made by corporate giving programs or nonprofit intermediaries which pass through funding from another source. So that is what a grant is. What is a grant proposal? A grant proposal is a narrative description of the work that a nonprofit organization plans to undertake to fulfill both its own and the grant maker's goals. The proposal includes, at minimum, a description of the problem to be addressed, a detailed plan for addressing the problem, what it will cost, and what results the grant maker can expect from the proposed project or initiative. After the proposal is accepted by the grant maker and a grant award is made, the grant proposal forms the basis for a legally binding contract between grant maker and grant recipient. By signing the contract, the recipient grantee agrees to perform mutually agreed on plans of work and to report its progress toward fulfilling the terms of the grant and achieving the goals set forth in its grant proposal. Now, who qualifies for grants? Most grants are made to nonprofit 501c3 organizations, designated public charities made exempt from federal income tax under IRS Code Section 5101c3. So, nonprofit 501c3 organizations include such institutions as schools, hospitals, clinics, religious organizations, homeless shelters and services, social service agencies, arts slash cultural organizations, universities, and many others. To maintain its 501c3 status, a public charity must pass a public support test showing that it receives its financial support from a broad segment of the general public. Therefore, a nonprofit organization should not seek most of its funding from one source. If it does so successfully, it could forfeit or tip its nonprofit status, making it ineligible for any other charitable gifts. Now, private foundations are restricted by law to fund only public charities and some government agencies, such as police and fire departments, unless they follow a lengthy and complicated process called expenditure responsibility. Community foundations and government agencies may fund a non 501c3 organization if the grant is for a charitable purpose, such as relief of poverty, advancement of education or religion, promotion of health, government or municipal use, or another purpose that would be beneficial to the community. Grants to individuals are rare except in the case of scholarships and instances such as commissions for artworks, translations, or scientific research. There are many resources on the specialized topic of grants to individuals. They are not covered in this book, though, so we'll have to get another book for that one. Now, who writes grants? Most often, grant proposals are written by the director or other staff member of the applying nonprofit organization. Individuals who work in development or fundraising often are expected to have grant writing skills. There are also professional grant writers who write grants for a fee. which is paid by the nonprofit organization. The job of a grant writer may or may not be limited to the actual writing of a grant proposal. The level of involvement varies based on the individual grant writer's level of skill and knowledge. The position the grant writer has within the applicant organization and the type of approach used in grant seeking. Now, this is the gray area. A decade of change inside this book. It says in the last decade, grant writing has become more of a specialized profession. Today, there are professional associations of grant writers, formal training and certification programs, and in many states, registration and licensing requirements for grant writing consultants. Grant writing has grown both easier and more difficult. Several innovations have streamlined the grant search and application process. Point one. The federal government has launched a notification service that makes requests for proposals from all federal departments available to any person who signs up for the service. Point two. The federal government and many foundations have established electronic submission forms and processes. You can submit a proposal and often a report of progress without shipping or hand delivering. Search engines help grant seekers find funding sources with the use of just a few keywords. Point three. Now it's point four. Grant writers once had to send letters or call to learn more about funders or to request guidelines and annual reports. Today, most grant makers post this information on their websites where it is easily accessible. What's more difficult? Philanthropy in general has become far more sophisticated than it once was. Today, grant proposals must focus strongly on outcomes and evaluation. Progress reports require data to support detailed explanations about what the grantee has accomplished with grant funds. At one time, any decent writer could write a grant proposal. Today, successful grant seeking requires more than writing skills alone. Now, a good grant writer must also be a good strategic planner, an analytical reader, a master of basic accounting principles, and a perpetual student of the field. The economy has also made grant seeking more difficult because foundations grow their corpuses through investments. When the stock market declines, so do the funds they have for grant making. When the government heavily allocates resources to a specific effort, such as prolonged military action, domestic programs, and organizations can struggle to find a funding opportunity. Ironically, over the past decade, nonprofit organizations have seen the need for their services grow, while grant revenues that might once have funded expansion have become more and more scarce, more than ever before. Nonprofit organizations are relying on good grant writers to help them continue to provide services to those in need. And I'm going to read this section here. What do grants fund? And then there will be two approaches to grant seeking, and we'll conclude today's podcast. So, what do grants fund? Grant seeking is a form of fundraising in which money is requested for a defined purpose and a specified time period. Most grants fund programs, projects, or research developed by the nonprofit organization to respond to a specific problem or need. Other relatively common types of grants include capital A. Capital. I'm thinking about a bank. A grant for a building, equipment, renovation, or construction. General operating would be an unrestricted grant for the everyday operations of the applicant organization. This type of grant allows the grantee to determine how it can best allocate the funding within its budget. Hmm. Technical assistance, a grant made to strengthen the nonprofit organization staff development, infrastructure, or other function that needs improvement. An endowment, that's a grant that is to be invested in perpetuity so that the nonprofit can draw earnings from the fund to support its defined purpose. There's demonstration, a grant made to develop an innovative project or program that, if successful, will serve as a model for others' replication. Startup, a grant to cover the cost of starting a new project or organization. Startup grants are also called seed grants. Exploratory/planning is a grant that enables an organization to flesh out a good idea, develop a stronger project, and project implementation and a project implementation plan, or test a theory or plan of action. Qualifying support. Here's a challenge. A grant made to stimulate giving from other sources. The donor releases funds only after the grantee has met the challenge, usually a specific amount of money to be raised, outlined in the grant agreement. Now, matching funds that correspond to those of other donors. Example, funds will match 2 to 1 those of other donors within a specified time frame. PRI is program related investment, a loan or other long term investment, as distinguished from a grant made by a foundation to another organization for a project related to the foundation's interests. Deep. Okay, I have to reread that one. And 2 approaches to grant seeking. There are 2 primary approaches to grant seeking: reactive and proactive. Reactive grants are those developed in response to a request for proposals, and often you see RFP. Reactive grants are those developed in response to a request for proposals, RFP. Reactive grant proposals are much like bids for a job and require grant writers with strong analytical reading and good writing skills. Proactive grants are those that involve identifying appropriate funding sources to support a specific nonprofit organization, program, or problem solving initiative. Approaching grant seeking proactively requires a well planned strategy and an overall knowledge of potential donor sources and their interests and motivations for funding. And one more time, I want to reread the above because this is in the section, what do grants fund? And most often we hear about, oh, I need a grant for my business, or I want to start a business. And they say, I can do funding, or I could do those different, I use those different platforms to ascertain funding. But here there's these other ones too. So just technical assistance, a grant made to strengthen the nonprofit organization staff development, infrastructure, or other function that needs improvement. And then this demonstration one, a grant made to develop an innovative project or program that, if successful, will serve as a model for others' replication. Oh, wow. I mean, the first time I was working within this book, uh, you don't remember everything. So that's the power of rereading. So this is the Micpt Reading Circle podcast. So just wanted to share that. And just to recap, this is just chapter 1. And we listened to what is a grant, what is a grant proposal, who qualifies for grants, who writes grants, and there is the gray areas like the information on the side. It says it's a decade of change. And then what do grants fund? Now that makes me think about, when was this book copywritten, based on the fact that we're in a new era. And some, of course, people think about ChatGPT and other AI that they can utilize those and possibly can. This was 2012, to a degree, because technology is here to help us to work faster, ascertain things faster, and embellish things for us. So, which is pretty cool. So, but this book, just so you know, is written in 2012. Okay, but so it might not be the same, of course, information about whether or not this section here that states that a decade of change. Okay, because we're now in 2026. As I was reviewing what I just read, that latter part, what do grants fund? I see it's most interesting to me. And then 2 approaches to grant seeking, and often you see RFP when you're looking for grants, and so it's just a reminder. It's a request for proposals. That is what the acronym stands for: request for proposals, RFP. And so those are, we see a lot of timelines for to submit grants, and so I thought that was pretty neat to really go over that so we can remember request for proposals, RFP. And we'll get into more information. And if you have any comments or success, because maybe some people are actually in the throes of writing grants, or they're being inspired to write a grant, it's pretty cool. And then maybe in the future we'll have some comments from this podcast. So maybe it may be your story in the future. We're just going to take time to read this book because it's very interesting. It's applicable to what I would like to do. And yeah, shout out to Cal State Dominguez Hills. I became a grant writer, and they have an excellent program there as well. And that was a few years ago that I participated. So I still have my book here. So the title, The Complete Book of Grant Writing. And once again, the authors are Nancy Burke Smith and E. Gabriel Works. All right. The main points of this book is how to find grants, where to apply, avoid common mistakes and pitfalls, government grants, foundation grants, specialty grants, and more. So get the funding you need. That is the log line or tagline there too. All right. So until next time, everybody, have a great time.
Big shout out to all our amazing customers who've already jumped on board the Compton in a box. Your support means the world to us. We've revamped our website to make it even easier to join the subscription. For upcoming months, don't miss out on the excitement. Head back to your cart on micpt.com and subscribe today. Let's make every month a Compton celebration. Compton in a box. Subscription perks. micpt.com Compton in a box. VIP experience appreciation. Head back to your cart on micpt.com.